I'm so glad to have the three of you on the stage. I really hope that you who sit here surrounded by hay appreciate the opportunity, because it's really rare to have the three of you on one stage. As Stefan said, he introduced you as hopefully the future of Russia, which is what I also hope. In the program, our discussion mentions the name that always draws a lot of media attention. I don't think we will talk much about him. It also says that we will discuss the future after him, but I think we will talk mostly about now, and we will speak about writing and trying to describe and trying to pinpoint where you are and where the Russian society, literature is right now. I will do a bit of an introduction. I really want to introduce the people you have on stage if you haven't read them, if you're not familiar with them before. Jana, in the middle, Kuchina, born outside of Moscow in a lovely village called Tarusa, very beautiful, on the Oka River. It's a place where Moscow intellectuals like to have their dachas, but it's also a place that's exactly 100 kilometers from Moscow. So a lot of the intellectuals that were put in the Gulag system and who were not allowed to resettle in Moscow could live in Tarusa, because it was exactly 100 kilometers. You were not allowed to live closer than 100 kilometers from Moscow. So this is the lovely place that you come from. But Jana has foremost been a journalist and an editor. And in Swedish, you can read her in this book, Jag börjar med mig själv. And these are columns that you have written in Hålad. But you've mostly been editing another journal that in English we could call it That's How It Is, or how would you translate the title? Такие дела.
I actually don't know. It's more like in Kurt Vonnegut, how it would be in original. You don't remember. It's a quote from Kurt Vonnegut. It's something like, so that's how it is.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. That's much better. And on my right here, we have Alla Gutnikova, who is a poet, an activist, and also a former magazine editor and journalist in a magazine that first started as a kind of voice of students of one particular university in Moscow, but then became a very important platform for thought and discussion in Russia overall, especially among young people, called Doxa. And it's also because of Doxa and your involvement there that you were later arrested and sentenced to 2 years of prison. And so Alla is miraculously with us. We will return to this. But Alla is one of the few former political prisoners in Russia. We are very happy this week, and this is what we've talked about in the last few days. We're very happy that there are more former political prisoners this week. It's rare, Alla. You were not that many former political prisoners before. And Jelena Kostiutjenko, you are modest, so I do not have to be modest. I can probably one of the most important journalists of the Russian language, a journalist who was very much linked to Novaya Gazeta, the very important newspaper that remained independent throughout Putin's reign and had to close because of the full-scale invasion. Jelena started at Novaya Gazeta as a 17-year-old. You are very much you are shaped by Novaya Gazeta. You later became one of the faces of Novaya Gazeta. You are a very traditional journalist. This is how I would describe you. Writing reportages, the reportages have been extremely important. One of the reportages was historical. In 2014, when Jelena managed to prove that when Russia was denying that regular troops, Russian troops, were present in Donbass, and tried to portray the conflict as only a civil war, Jelena's article was the one that proved the existence of regular Russian troops. We will perhaps return to this. Jelena was also one of the few, very few, handful of Russian citizens that were trusted by Ukrainian authorities to report from Ukraine during the full-scale invasion. And this was a short time because it became very apparent that you're under death threat, and you had to leave Ukraine because of your own safety. And later, if you've read it, if you haven't read it, read it in Dagens Nyheter, Jelena's text about when she realizes that she has been poisoned by the Russian authorities in exile in Germany. So Jelena is also one of the journalists that have been targeted by the Russian security services, and there has been a poisoning attempt. So please excuse this long introduction, but I really want you to understand why I'm so happy to have these three voices on stage, because it's exceptional, it's rare, and thank you very much, Sakli, for making this possible. Before we go into your own writing, could we say a few words about the prison exchange and about your feelings right now this week about what happened, and how would you describe the sort of general sense that this prison exchange has created in your environments? If you start, Alla.
Well, for those who haven't heard about that in particular, a couple of days ago, 16 political prisoners from Russia were exchanged to some sort of spies, killers, and other people that we'd probably not mention here. I mean, we could, but we are more interested in the political prisoners part of the exchange. And among them were Ilya Yashin, Vladimir Karamurza, Sasha Skocilenko, and many others. And for sure, that feels like an absolute miracle. But at the same time, in Russia, there is a song with the line «Радость со слезами на глазах», which means joy with tears. And I would say that that would probably be the perfect line to express it, because 16 people are now free and they're hugging their families, and now they're saved because some of them were under death threat because of their medical circumstances, and they were not receiving any needed medical help. But at least 1,200 other political prisoners are still in detention. And yesterday there were news that one of the activists has died, Pavel Kushnir, in prison because like he was starving in protest. He was a pianist, and it's like half of your heart is delighted and so happy, and half of your heart is always broken and never will be not broken until all political prisoners are free.
Jana, how did you feel?
I feel ashamed because it's really difficult for me to feel happy even with half of my heart, because I, as a person, I think that sometimes tolerate and survive the pain and the hard times, it's so much harder than to live after that with the consequences. And there are beautiful, brave, amazing people whose time was stolen. And I really, all this time, I just pray for their health and pray for their families, and I hope they will have a strength to live after all that. And they are free, but they stayed in Russia to be in Russia. They stayed in Russia to make Russia free. They are free themselves, but now they need to learn how to live without their country. It would be so hard. I hope we all would be here for them.
Thank you. Two of the people you mentioned, Alla Karamurza and Yashin, they are political leaders, and it's now apparent that Yashin was sort of forced to leave because, like Alexei Navalny, he did not want to leave Russia because he wants to play a part in Russia's political future. But he was told that he's part of this exchange. If he is not accepting it, then there will be no exchange. So it was a kind of hostage or blackmail situation for him. Jelena, in your case.
I mean, I feel happy for them, but I also feel angry, like lots of angry, because my country basically trading the best of its people for murderers. And it doesn't feel good for me. It doesn't feel right for me. And I'm in exchange of letters with the political prisoners who are in prison right now. And they such a different, such a wonderful and strong people who has committed no crime. And their time, their life, their health, their opportunities to make life of our countries better is constantly taken from them, and they live in constant fear and humiliation. And I feel very angry about it. And I can say I was crying last 2 days, like all the time.
Anna, can you tell us more about this contact that you have with political prisoners right now?
Well, friend of mine, Lida Manyava, she has a system of support of, she created system of support of political prisoners. So they basically send them letters and books and kind of newsfeed, some resume of what had happened, because people in prisons are being isolated from the outside world. They don't know what's happening. And they also ask some people to write like kind of public letters to them. So I was the one who wrote these kind of letters, and some of these prisoners answered me and I answered them back. So it's kind of, more personal conversation. And in my first letter to them, I mentioned my students, and I called them like 20 years old kids. And then I got an answer from young woman who says like, well, you call them kids, 20 years old kids. I'm 21 and I'm sentenced for 9 years in prison for like state treason. And I don't feel myself a kid at all. But I'm very happy for people who can feel in my age as kids and still enjoy the. Well, she is prisoned for 9 years for transferring money to Ukrainian charity organization. She transferred $10 and then $20, and for $30 for Ukrainian charity organization, she sentenced for 9 years.
Alla, I mean, you are the one who have experienced this, who have been inside a Russian prison, sentenced also for being an editor and a journalist. What would you, this is hopefully one of the things you'll write a book about that we can read in the future. But if you would want to tell us one thing that makes us understand more about the fate of political prisoners in Russia, what would you convey to us? What kind of image would you give us?
It's hard to choose only one thing, but probably the thing that struck me most during my political imprisonment, which I have to say, I was quite privileged to be only held under house arrest for a year, and now it can be considered as happiness and like very good punishment, because it was before the full-scale war, and now I know that for the same thing, there was just a 3-minute video saying that teenagers and students have the legal right to express their political views, which is like referring to the constitution. Now for the same thing would probably be straight in prison. But they were trying to put us to prison, and we had 212 volumes of our criminal case, and it had almost nothing to do with us or with our media, but it since they were charging us with involving minors into life-threatening acts, for suggesting that it's fine to go on protest and express their views. These volumes, they had information on teenagers all over Russia going on protests to support Navalny after he was poisoned and he went back to Russia and got arrested. And we were just amazed to see how many teenagers and school kids all over Russia would go protesting, fully understanding what's going on. So they were probably like 11-year-old kids talking to the persecutor, to the investigator, and telling them how they feel about the country, how they feel about all the country being kind of stolen apart and their future is being stolen. So for us, that was very important and very, in a way, inspiring material to know, because also I'm from Moscow, and Moscow is like a very special place, which is not equal to Russia at all, but it was really, really important to know that all over Russia there are voices, especially young voices, who feel the same and who are brave enough to be, fighting. And now, after the beginning of full-scale war and with the war censorship, it's almost impossible to do any act of protest with an open face without being almost immediately persecuted. So either you become like a partisan and go underground, or you leave the country, or you get arrested. So there are no many paths for young people now anymore.
We will continue with the introductions with readings, and I will read 2 of the chosen texts in Swedish translation, and then Alla will read a text that she has chosen in English translation. But I will start by introducing Jana as a writer. And she has chosen for me to read the very beginning of the texts that are collected in this book that's on sale behind us here. Jag börjar med mig själv. Alltihop började för länge sedan. Så länge sedan att jag inte ens nådde upp till handfatet på tåget med fingrarna, utan mamma fick lyfta upp mig från marken när jag skulle tvätta händerna. För så länge sedan att pappa fortfarande kunde kasta upp mig på axeln med bara en hand. För så länge sedan att vi fortfarande ansträngde oss för att vara varandra till lags. Vi var på tåget på väg hem från mormor och morfar. Vi hade inte träffat pappa på en månad, mamma var orolig. Gryningsljuset flög genom vagnen i vita ränder. Jag försökte slita mig lös och ställa mig ute i korridoren för att ljuset skulle lyfta upp mig. Jag får inte prata dumheter, men jag hoppas verkligen att det ska lyfta upp mig från marken. Jag får inte prata dumheter, därför säger jag inget, försöker bara slita mig lös. Försök nu att gå ordentligt, sa mamma. Nu ska vi av och du måste gå själv, jämnt och fint. Hör du, ansträng dig lite. Jag fick syn på pappa, min långa pappa med de blå ögonen, och började springa. Jag brydde mig inte om att försöka räta ut knäna. Jag ansträngde mig inte det minsta. Jag skrattade. Jag kan fortfarande komma ihåg hur vacker pappa var och hur han slutade le när jag började springa. När jag var liten trillade jag hela tiden. Jag har cerebral pares. Vid 4 års ålder kunde jag inte prata och gå samtidigt. Inte skratta och gå. Inte gå och äta glass. Så fort jag slutade tänka på mina steg så trillade jag. Så även nu. Pappa fångade upp mig och såg sig om. var det många som hade sett oss. Mamma log och sa, det är tågresan bara, hon har inte sovit ut. Jag höll mig fast i pappas kläder, han luktade gott. Det billiga rakvattnet hade en söt doft av tobak. Pappa hade med sig en vän, vi var på järnvägsstationen, vi var mitt i Moskva. Alla hade sett oss. Om det inte hade varit för vännen, tänkte jag, hade pappa förlåtit mig och gett mig en glad kram nu. Pappa gick mycket snabbt genom stationen till bilen. Mamma kom springande efter, det var knappt hon hann med. En sån vacker vit dag. Och nu har jag förstört den, tänkte jag. Jana, in this fragment, the very beginning of this book, you describe the shame that surrounds your particular disability, other non-variants of ability.
The shame of being weak and different from others.
Yes. Your writing is very linked to being a voice and an activist. If you would describe both the shame, but also the surrounding circumstances, which is what your book is about, shortly for us, just as an entrance point into discussing your writing, what would you tell us?
After the war started, I was thinking a lot, not about my country, like in general, because it's really difficult, to think about something in general, especially as big as the country you live in. But I was thinking about my life, what can I do differently? And also, I was wondering what kind of personal experience should people have to receive an order to go and kill others and then follow these orders. I specifically not saying what kind of people should you be, because I personally believe that people are pretty much the same, but they have really different lives and life experience and life circumstances, and how you should be treated and treat others, not to ignore this order, but just to follow them. And I was start to remember some days of my life where I was witnessing typical situation. I was very, very used to it and never marked them as violence and discrimination. But after the war started, I started to mark this situation like that, because you know what? If Putin told you should go to the war and you can return as a disabled, well, I think almost nobody would agree. That's why they say you can be hero and be killed, or you can return and be alive and healthy. They do everything to keep disabled people away, because it's so shameful in Russia to be weak, to be different, to be disabled. So as a disabled person myself, I started to rethink my responsibility. What did I do for people to look around, to see disabilities, to be more, I don't know, to imagine different scenarios of life better, and to treat people differently. I personally believe that if you cannot treat yourself as a kind and nice person, you cannot treat others. If you cannot treat others like your children, like your neighbors, like your, I don't know, pupils in your class, you would agree one day to a human order to go and kill your distant neighbors. So,
but Jana, if you could help me with one thing, because one of the most difficult moments during the 5 years that I worked for Sweden in Russia was when I was faced with the fact that we worked with with helping cultural institutions to become more accessible through Swedish experiences and knowledges and so on. And then I found out that in many of these towns, when the local authorities have wanted to change something, protests usually come from citizens, parent groups that come together protesting against the local authorities, saying we don't want our healthy children to look at quote unquote invalids. It's harmful for them. And this challenged the whole idea that I had that we are working with the Russian society against the Russian authorities. And in this particular case, we were working with Russian local authorities in a surrounding where the society was opposing what we were doing.
It would be just my opinion, because I was thinking about it from as long as I remember myself. You know, after I came out as a lesbian and started to give some interview, my parent was not happy, and it's a soft way to describe this. My mom still doesn't speak with me, and the fact that hurt my father more than being a lesbian, open one, that I was bold enough to speak about my disability. It's a shame. It's a shame to be disabled. Why you did that? And when I asked him why it's so shameful, why, please answer me. Like 34 years after I was being born, please answer this question, why it's such a shame. He said, they would see you as a weak one. As a weak one, what would they do next? They would pity you once, they would pity you twice. But what would they do next with you? And I can tell by his face that he really thinks that people would throw me apart because I'm weak. So I really think that in Russia, many aspects of life controlled by fear. And in case of disability, they really pretend that they're all healthy. And it's easy for them to make this safe distance between healthy people and not healthy people, and pretend that that disabilities not exist and to deal with it. There are a huge difference between what kids ask you about on the street and what adults ask you about. I won't quote any adult's question. It's absolutely, it's madness. You can imagine all strange questions, and there are all of this kind of question in Russia. But kids, they ask only two. If they ask, are you in pain? Because they're really worried. And the second question is, what's happened? And I asked enough following questions to understand them. They want to know if it could happen with them. They are so afraid it could happen with them, they want to keep this difference. At moments they understand it never can happen with them. It's just a trauma. When you are born, they are born healthy. It's not like some disease you can catch. They keep calm. I think that at some level, Russian people understand how injustice, disgraceful our society is. If we speak about how they speak and treat disabled people, so they are just so afraid. So they decide somehow to stay as the way as possible. And our state, it's the people behavior, it's just a reflection of state politics, because at the same time we have a state politics, and state politics is to keep disabled people in the places worse than prison. I'm sorry to say that, but political prisoners at least have their, time in prison, 8 years old, 10 years old, even 20 years old. It's not all your life, because I know people who see the real world only when they being driven in a car from one closed facilities for children to another closed facilities to adult one, and it's their only chance to see, the
Jana,
life.
do you have the current figures of an estimate of how many people are institutionalized? And
177,000.
so thank you, Jelena, for coming. I mean, you have written a reportage and it's in this book. Someone wants to read, there is a reportage from one of these institutions. I think it's important when we talk about the political prisoners also to talk about 177,000 institutionalized people who by very random diagnosis have ended up there.
People with my condition, I also lived in these closed facilities. I have cerebral palsy, and when a baby with cerebral palsy is born, doctors suggest mothers to left this baby for the system, because as they describe it, it's better for the baby to live with professionals who know how to care about such unhealthy ones. So I think that people behavior is reflection of the state policy. I, I mean, not all of it, but it's connected a lot.
Thank you. And what I wanted to stress was, of course, that in this local government, I also met just not making Russia black and white. There is a system, but there are also people on the local level sometimes who really do try to change something and care. And this is what we experienced and what we collaborated with. If we just say a few words, because you have mostly, I mean, you started writing columns in Cholod, but now you have decided to write something, something larger, and you're in the process of doing this.
Yes, I wrote the hardest, I hope so, part, the first one. I tried to write this part for 14 years. It's the scary part about surgeries, experimental surgeries they perform on disabled people, because there is no one to protect them. The doctors usually chose the one from orphanage or the one from regions, not from Moscow. I was not from Moscow, so I was the person who they experimented on, and nobody punished them. I mean, maybe it's I come back from the for the to the previous question about our political prisoners. Maybe it's the part where it's so hard for me to feel the joy, because nobody is punished for stealing 4 years of their lives, and it's absolutely unfair, another act of injustice. And as for disabled people, well, they have limited rights in Russia. Some of them in these closed facilities, they have none rights. And I wrote a part about me, 14 years old, stopped walking at all after doctors performed surgeries, and doctors who pretend nothing happened. I never walked. Like I never walked. I walked before a week before the surgery, and then stopped, and they pretend, well, I always was like that. And I wrote it down, and now I'm writing what happened next with me, what happened with my family, and how my little town, Tarusa, who you deeply loved, and I'm not proud to saying that, but I think I don't. What happened with me, with people, with this town, and with my country, and how I tried to pretend I'm a healthy one, and how I failed, of course. and what happened next. I hope I will finish this book this year. It was the hardest work of my life, and I hope I will do it.
I hope to read it, Jana. I think you can think of all of us as future readers of your book.
Thank you.
Alla, you have chosen a text that you would like to read for us in English translation.
Yeah, short commentary to that. So when we were arrested, all of our lives were containing of going to the investigative committee for interrogations, going to the court, facing with all of the forces. And they tried to convince us that now the meaning of our lives would be this criminal case. And I would carry like a pink, notepad with me, and I would, in investigative committee, I would like write under the table to make sure that they're not stealing my life and they're not stealing me from me and not stealing the meaning of my life. So, and then in a couple of months, I wrote this text. It's like poetry prose. So here is a fragment translated to English. Swan Song of Shira Shirim, a fragment. How much time do you need to get dressed? Captivity. Babe alone in Babylon. Baby Bambi in the lap of Babylon. Gentle thread, light step, with a gentle tread to the animus camp. You don't care if you go down in history as barbarians. Have you heard of the butterfly affect, the barbarous? How to address you? Uninvited guests? Shacklers, jail wardens, piteous, grey, doctors of my body, I'm your banded bird, but the human soul knows no shackles. Didn't they teach you that in school? Stop, stop, gentlemen of the jury. I've seen this movie before. Nadya Tolokonnikova, clenched fist, clenched teeth, no pasaran. Alexandra Dukhanina, eyes blindfolded, riot police cutting off her windpipe. February, May, 2012, I am 13, outside politics. I'm young, they're raging, I'm old, they're raging. Poetry in front of the monuments. Which balaclava for you? Color or black? Same songs, same posters, same slogans. Go away, winter. Morning paints with gentle light. Nemtsov is killed. Heroes don't die. 2015. I am 16. Spring. My first beloved says over the phone, no, don't go anywhere. This is Russia. Nothing will ever change. I remember this conversation to this day. You don't want problems, do you? You don't want problems. You don't want problems, my angel. The angel of history. Eyes, mouth, wings. And here I also refer to the assassination, to the killing of Boris Nemtsov, who was a prominent politic, and now we see the almost the same killing and assassination of Alexei Navalny. And also there's like probably the first one is not full of hope, but also I have this tiny one, which is somehow it's a documentary piece. It's only 5 lines, and when I read it, I always say it's documentary. I didn't invent this. That I saw that with my own eyes. I heard it with my ears, because it's in a way confusing. And when I read, I hope you understand why. It's called A Short Story to Make People Cry. When they were taking me for interrogation after the raid, in an unmarked white van, one of the guards gently turned his phone to me and typed 4 words, Russia will be free.
Yesterday there was a panel that you couldn't listen to because it was in Swedish about documentary poetry and about finding the form to really convey what you would like to describe in your experiences and what's surrounding you. And you have, I mean, I've known you as a journalist, I've read you in Doxa, but now I'm reading you as a poet, or I've read you before as a poet, and I see that you're really struggling to convey similar messages. You're really trying to make me as a reader understand something. And you're looking for a form for this. So how would you describe your struggle with form and language and trying to tell what you also, I would like to say she has also expressed herself in one of Russia's most dignified genres, последнее слово, the last word, which miraculously the Russian courts still allow political prisoners to give. Your last word, because before you're sentenced. Stig Fredriksson has published a volume of such in Swedish translation, and in your последнее слово, you say, you stress truth, repeat to yourself, 2 + 2 is 4, black is black, white is white. Truth seems to be very important to you. How do you struggle with this?
I want to say a few words about this final court statement, the last word. I have to admit that at the time I was writing it, I was really ashamed of myself. I despised myself because it was after the beginning of full-scale invasion, and we've been under house arrest for almost a year, and now the verdict is near, and you're supposed to write this last word. And that's after the war censorship laws. And I know that for even mentioning a word war, I can get a new sentence.
Additional sentence. Yeah.
And that's, what's happening. So I guess Sasha Skochelenko, who is now, thanks God, free, she was arrested those days, for simply changing the price tags at the supermarket and adding some information on war crimes in Mariupol. And I have this goal. I want to talk about truth, and I want to talk about freedom, and I want to talk about war, but I'm not allowed to use the word war, and I'm not even allowed to mention any of this. So I tried to be as literary, as poetic, as metaphoric as possible to still say what I want to say, that, we need to all agree on that 2 + 2 is 4, and that peace is peace and war is war, not the otherwise. But not to make the prosecutors wanna leave me in the system forever, because by that time my mental health was like totally ruined. I knew, I mean, people say like I'm brave, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to do that anymore. And I tried to write it referring to the dissident books I'd read at school, referring to this never again quote from the Shoah monument in Majdanek, and trying to just kind of take everything that I've learned so far, and like that's a kind of a last chord, and say, okay, this is why the word needs to be stopped. This is why we need to be speaking about that, because it was like the early months, and somehow was probably too naive, and also like in isolation under house arrest, thinking that if we can break through this information isolation, if we could, print the pictures of kids and like mothers in maternity hospitals being killed, then the war would immediately stop, because just people don't have enough information. And then I made it, and I literally like hated myself for being that not brave enough, because my partners in crime, they were in the courtroom, they were talking about the war crimes, and they were saying that precisely, and hopefully they were not sentenced for that, but we never know. And then somehow, because it was so metaphorical and because it was so literary, it became quite, well known. And I guess now it's translated to probably 12 languages or so. But also at the same time, I tried to be not let them catch me with that, but also I had to be really precise, but also very clear, like talking to a baby, this is white, this is black, like we learn how to count, but because that's public, speech. But when I work with my ordinary poetry, then for me it's a little bit more complicated, because normally I use collages a lot, and I kind of work with a lot of different texts, and especially like Jewish tradition is very important to me. So my texts would normally be more dark, and they're not so probably easy to understand without a commentary. And probably that's the thing I struggle most with this book on the arrest, because there is the way I usually write, and it's kind of very poetic, and not like a witness should be, because when you're a witness you need to be
because you're working on a text right now that is about your arrest. And
yes. So I have like a lot of diaries from that time, and I was not allowed to use internet, but I had this trick. I was kind of using someone, like a trusted person who was, never existed, but I was writing my Instagram diary with like Alla reported, and then I have like a lot of diaries from that time. But I really want to witness, I want to say what was there, what it was like in the investigative committee, what I was reading in these volumes, but also just like my way of doing literature is the other one. So now I have to deal with this difficult, probably combination and mixture of combining two ways of speaking, like very clear one and a very dark one and sophisticated one.
Thank you. Jelena, we will go into the fragment you chose from your book. I just want to say literally a few sentences about this book. This book contains both reportages that you have written throughout the years in Novaya Gazeta that you have chosen, reportages from Russia, but they are paired with newly written texts that were written after the full-scale invasion. And the text that we're reading now is one of the new texts. Skratta om du vill, men jag känner igen dem direkt. De som inte haft tur. Jag till och med skäms för männen. Jag anser att man bör tillfredsställa en kvinna. Det är det viktigaste. Vet du hur mycket jag kan? Jag kan allt möjligt. Var har ni lärt er det? Vadå var? Frugan lärde mig. Då hade ni tur med frugan. Vad heter hon? Varför vill du veta det? Jag bara frågar. Jaså, du bara frågar. Min familj angår inte dig. Nej, naturligtvis inte. Ursäkta. Varför ber du om ursäkt? Som jag skulle bli förolämpad. Jag är snäll mot dig. Jag är snäll mot dig. Så var snäll du också. Okej? Det är en lång resa, annars kommer vi aldrig fram. Han svänger av från landsvägen. Han säger, det finns några byar här. Jag gräver i handväskan men hittar ingenting att försvara mig med. En anteckningsbok, en diktafon, utskrifterna, en penna, en tom plånbok, några mynt. Jag tar ett hårt grepp om pennan. Vi kör igenom 2 sovande byar under tystnad. Föraren muttrar, jag borde kanske fråga om vägen. Det är natt. Vi kör längs en grusväg som leder in i en mörk skog. Trädgrenarna rör vid bilen från båda sidorna. Bilen stannar. Föraren börjar fälla ner sätet. Jag rycker upp dörren och hoppar ut. Han går ut från sin sida. Vad gör du? Och vad gör ni? Jag blev så trött och måste sova lite. Man kan inte köra hela natten. Jag har bråttom. Det är farligt att köra för snabbt när föraren är trött. Nu ska jag sova lite och du kan sitta bredvid. Nej. Vad menar du med nej? Jag väntar utanför. Sov ni? Det är mygg ute. Det gör inget. Jag väntar. Vila ni om ni måste. Han sätter sig i bilen. Jag går bort mot några buskar och undrar vart jag ska springa. Ibland prasslar det i skogen bakom mig. Jag känner mig varm. Han kommer ut igen. Nå, har du ångrat dig? Va? Du borde kanske också sova lite. Jag ser att det rycker i ögonlocken. Nej, jag vill inte sova. Det vill du. Jag vill inte. Är du rädd för mig? Du ser ut som om jag tänkte dra in dig i buskarna. Var inte rädd. Jag är snäll. Jag är inte rädd. Inte alls. Precis. Jag förstod direkt att du är modig. En normal människa skulle inte ge sig iväg mitt i natten. Varför väntar du inte till morgonen? Jag sa ju att jag måste dit snabbt. Det har varit ett terrorattentat. Människor har dött. Vad då? Tänker du återuppliva dem? Jag begriper mig inte på journalister. De kommer flygande som flugor till skiten. Men okej, då åker vi. Ska ni inte sova? Vad blir det för sömn tillsammans med er? Vi åker. Jag ska köra dig till Vyshera. Efter en halvtimme börjar ljusna. Vi irrar fortfarande omkring i skogen och kommer fram till en järnvägsövergång. Vyshera ligger på andra sidan. Du får gå den sista biten, säger föraren. Fy fan vilken natt. Köra runt så här för 6 jävla tusen. Du tiger. Ja men tig då. Att ge sig iväg i en vit klänning. Jag har själv en dotter som håller på att bli stor. Jag borde snacka med din redaktör att skicka iväg en tjej så här. Du hade verkligen tur att jag är så snäll. Tur. Det är ju inte alla människor som är snälla. Lägg det på minnet, journalistbruden. Han sätter sig i bilen, vänder om. Jag ser honom köra iväg. Jag går fram till järnvägsspåret och sätter mig på rälsen. Jag måste vänta tills det dyker upp någon som jag kan fråga var det sprängda tåget finns. Jelena, can you tell us about this fragment? You chose it. What does it mean to you?
Well, in this book, it's like the first time I ever told this story. And actually, all these new parts, what I wrote in the book, it was the hardest part for me to write. Because I actually became a journalist because I never wanted to talk about myself, to be concentrated on myself, my own life, my own experiences. But after the full-scale invasion, then I realized that I have to write a book about how my country, my beloved country, became a fascist country. I realized that I cannot hide again behind the backs of my characters as I always did. I cannot say, look how we became fascists. I need to look at my own life as well. I chose this fragment specifically because I wanted to say about that Russia is kind of pregnant with violence and with tolerance to violence. We have it for years. It's not like it started 24th February of 2022. The violence in Russia is routine. And the thing, while it was such a taboo topic for me to even talk about, for example, this specific case, and I got nearly raped, also because I was ashamed. And here I want to relay with Jana a lot, because you try not to be weak, you try not to cause any problems, you try to be unnoticeable, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're a LGBTQ woman, and especially if you're a woman in men's job like reporting.
And a very young journalist.
Yes. So this book was for me not just the investigation of, my country and circumstances my people are living in, but also like investigation of my own life and experience. And I saw a lot of parallels and a lot of connections with my characters, what I described for Novaya. And so that's how it became possible for me to talk about, slow raising of fascism.
Lena, I know that you told me before that you have lost your main instrument. I mean, for many years, you, as a 17-year-old, you came to Novaya Gazeta, you really became part of this newspaper. You really became part of a journalistic ethos, as you just said, where you're not in the focus. You're trying to describe what's happening to your country, to other people. And now you're in exile. So you cannot do reportages from Russia. How does this feel?
It feels awful. I mean, I know that it's not like super healthy thing, but I always defined myself through my work. And there was nothing I loved more than do reporting from Russia for Russians in Russian language. And now it's kind of unavailable for me. I cannot come back, or I will be imprisoned in the best case scenario. Right now, I mean, as a reporter, I'm choosing some topics outside of Russia I still can cover. I recently traveled to Ukraine again, and I'm kind of writing right now about what's happening there, but of course it's not the same. And also right now I'm writing the second.
It's not the same. What kind of responsibility do you feel now? I mean, I told those who listened before that, I mean, when you entered Ukraine after the full-scale invasion, you were one of really a handful Russian citizens allowed into Ukraine, and one of the few journalists reporting from Ukraine. Now you are allowed back. How do you feel, and what kind of responsibility do you feel?
It's a huge responsibility because so far I'm like the only Russian journalist who was granted with Ukrainian visa. So it seems like it depends a lot on my work, like how they would see my work. But also I'm not sure that right now I'm in the position of being heard, because right now it's like the third year of war. The war is, I have no words to describe it in the way you would understand. There is no single family in Ukraine who didn't lose anyone in this war. And when I was going there, I was afraid that they won't speak with me because I'm Russian citizen, and so on, so on. And it appeared not to be true. They spoke with me, but also they were afraid speaking with me because of they were afraid to be called as collaborators for speaking with me. They were afraid to be ashamed by their government or their neighbors for speaking with Russian journalists. And a lot of stories I wrote down are anonymous stories. And I just felt that when I was speaking with some of people, I just felt that I'm kind of, make their situation worse than make them more vocal about things they feel and see.
Even under these circumstances, do you feel that there is a sense for you as a Russian journalist to report from Ukraine?
I think there is. Because, of course, I'm mostly addressed to the Russian readers, and Russian readers are traditionally, they are inclined to trust more to Russian journalists who we know for years than to Ukrainian journalists who we might believe that were not real journalists, just propaganda and stuff. But it was very challenging trip, I should say. It was very challenging trip. Should I do another trip? I think I will. But also I feel that I need to write another book.
You've been trying.
I am trying. It's super hard. I mean, I would never chose this path if I would have mine. Still.
If you had your job.
Yeah. I believe so, yeah. So right now I'm writing another book, and it's partly documentary, partly fictional, and it's about how that there is no crime which can be just buried in the ground and remains unknown, that people would know about the crime anyway. And it's also related with some kind of big trauma what I had during my reporting work. So far I'm kind of looking for right intonation, right angle, and, right language to talk about things I want to talk about. I'm sorry it sounds super vague, but it's still kind of vague for me.
Yeah, I won't pressure you. I think everyone will excuse me if I take 10 more minutes of your time. But I'm curious, Jelena, this, is a question to you as to all three of you. The responsibility you must feel. You've always been careful. I read you as a person who's always very careful with words, who try to be empathetic and just. But right now, it seems that, how do you even, how do you find that compass, that instrument that weighs words right now, when everything is so, what you say, if you really want to be true, if you really want to give justice to the society that you grew up in, that you now realize is fascist, is destroying another country, but also itself. How is this process concretely for you?
Well, I use some help. I currently run 2 laboratories, writing laboratories with feminist anti-war resistance activists, and also with some grassroots lesbian community. So those people are in Russia, and they want to use language as a tool to describe what they see and what they feel. And we kind of trying to find a new language for the reality of ongoing catastrophe, because old language doesn't seem to work very much.
Because one language is also part of the warfare, right?
Well, Putin certainly tries to make Russian language as a part of warfare and a part of casus belli for attacking neighboring countries. But I believe that Russian language is bigger and older than Putin and his regime, and it will survive us all. The other problem I see is that people are extremely traumatized right now, and it's very hard to talk with their hearts without triggering, defensive reaction, various type of defensive reactions. And
you're speaking about people living in Russia right now.
I'm speaking about people living in Russia, speaking about people living in Ukraine, speaking with people living in exile. I mean, this war, really broke so many lives in very different ways, of course, but still. And but I believe that we need to keep talking, and we need to build this conversation, because language creates these invisible connections between people, and those invisible connections, not politicians, not international organizations, are able to actually stop war and change situation. But it's very hard task. There is this term like war language, but there is no term like peace language, right? Right now I'm trying to find a way to speak about trauma and war and fascism and memory and values without adding the energy into this black hole which war creates, black hole of violence. And it's really hard and challenging. So if any of you have any ideas what kind of tools I can use, or if you're also thinking about this thing as I do, please approach me after. I will be very happy to communicate about it.
I think I want to clarify that all three of our panelists here have agreed to speak to you and answer questions afterwards. So during the afternoon and concert tonight, please come up to them if you want to ask any specific questions. I really recommend everyone to read Jelena's book, read Jana's book, and wait for Alla's book. But you can also find texts by Alla Gutnikova online. I'm so glad that you're all here speaking to me. I have one last question to you. We spoke a bit about it yesterday. I mean, I work with Ukrainian writers, with Belarusian writers, and with Russian writers right now, and I've had talks. I know in Ukrainian, among Ukrainians, there is a firm position not to share stages with Russian writers right now, not performing. I mean, there's a lot of dialogue going on outside of stages, but not have performing a dialogue on stage as the war is continuing. There's also a lot of pressure on you. I mean, there's a lot of opinions that Russians should keep silent, or that there's a lot of also accusations. Why are Russians keeping silent? It seems very difficult to do the right thing as a public figure or as a person with a voice and a platform coming from the Russian Federation right now. How do you handle this, Alla?
I think I have a short story that I shared yesterday with you to answer that, because for a couple of years after the beginning of full scale war, I really, like, as a feminist, I felt that I don't need to be taken up the space because this, like, I want the space to be given to the Ukrainians to tell their stories. And I was afraid that, like, in Europe, you know, if I accept the invitation, then I would somehow steal the opportunity for other people to speak whose stories are much more important than mine. But then I agreed to be part of the like big documentary theater show, because it was addressed to the German audience. I live in Berlin, and it was also about, like, other political prisoners. So I wanted, you know, to talk to the audience about other political prisoners. And there we also had, like, a tiny part on the full scale war. I was not, you know, Jelena was there and seen that with her own eyes. I've never ever been there. I don't feel that I have any right to even kind of address that directly, apart from saying, you know, my position. And there I was saying out loud that we need to fight for arming Ukraine. We need to be donating to Ukraine. We need to be listening to Ukrainian voices. And afterwards, the audience would approach me and tell me that that was the first ever time they've heard a Russian person saying that we need to arm Ukraine, like that they've never ever heard a Russian person saying that before. And I was absolutely astonished and surprised by that. And afterwards, I somehow felt that when I'm declining the offer and, like, live in the space, I'm not actually doing any good for like my Ukrainian colleagues, because they would probably then only invite someone else from Russia whose like position is not that clear, or who might be, because for sure there are all other like kind
Just
of
speak
opinions.
about something else.
Yeah,
Or
and then I thought that okay, in some way it might be the decision, but for sure, like, you need to be really sensitive, you need to be really careful, and you need to always stick, to the principles like nothing about us without us. So you, from my point of view, you only talk about your own lived experience or something that like refers to you specifically. So let's say I talk a lot about political prisoners and survivor guilt, etc., but but it looks like we need to be, regarding this like responsibility, we are like responsible for everything at the same time, and that's a very it's a very hard task, but that's just такие дела, like the way it is. You need to be responsible both for the full-scale invasion, you need to be responsible for the political prisoners, you need to be responsible for the minorities, and it's like looks like the society just should divide to like different clusters working specifically on this
because
and
in
that.
exile also you as being Jewish but still being perceived as a Russian majority voice, you're also questioned by ethnic minorities in Russia. This is a completely different topic for another occasion, but it's important to stress that this is the situation in exile. The empire is not only about Ukraine, it's within Russia itself. Jana.
I don't think it matters, me being Russian. I'm sorry for saying that. Maybe it's rude, but from my early childhood, I remember my mother explained me how different I am being disabled, how people would treat me differently, how I should be prepared, how I should compensate, be good enough to be tolerated. And it's not only a fascistic way of thinking, but growing older, I understand how disrespectful I was to other people, to suspect them of being, I don't know, injustice, of being that they would judge me based on something I have no influence at. Some of them judged me, some of them don't, but I don't want to be disrespectful again. I don't think that people would judge me based on nationality, even if they would. So my responsibility as a person, if I speak openly and public, for me, it's not a recipe for everyone, no, but for me, it's being completely honest. It's my only limit. I think that the time now, it's so dark and people are dying and people paying with their freedom and their health and their families for what they say. So if I speak about anything publicly, I should say I'm from Russia, and I should being as honest as I can myself as a person. It's my main responsibility. That's what I feel, and that's what I can control. So
Thank you. Jelena, how many languages is your book translated to now?
14
So
being translated, not
Yeah.
all the languages yet ready.
So it gives you a platform. And so how do you feel about this?
Then the war had started. I had no time to read news or something. I was working in Ukraine and I was kind of absorbing everything I see and hear, and I wasn't able to follow the media sphere, what's happening there. But then I left Ukraine and then start to Google what's happening. I see that people outside of Russia have kind of vague understanding what country we are and specifics we have. And in that kind of vague atmosphere, it's kind of hard to understand what to do, who's to communicate with, what connections should we build. And this make the day of peace is more far away. But I also think that the threat of fascism is not our own threat. It's kind of getting global. And I know that in your own country, you also have some political movements who are kind of trying to follow this blissful path. And I believe I can use my experience and my example of person who lost his own country to say that this danger is real. And if you feel this danger, don't let other people just say that, oh, this never will happen, because any culture, any country can be damaged by this. And I'm very happy to be here and to have this conversation. And I hope it will continue after we put the microphones down. Because as I said before, those connections which are being created between people of different countries and different cultures is something what really hold the world together. And now world is trying to fall apart. So let's hold it together. Thank you.
And I'm very proud that these three voices could come here to Sakli